Darth Nathaniel Cole had always been drawn to the unknown. The thrill of uncovering long-forgotten relics from ancient civilizations was what drove him beyond the limits of human exploration. No matter the risks to his life or reputation, he was obsessed with the mysteries of the universe, and this new planet called Velaro was no exception. Reports from deep space showed the planet had been abandoned for millennia, its surface scarred by violent storms and shifting tectonic plates. The data was inconsistent, but Nathaniel had an instinct about it, an instinct that led him to abandon his research at more established sites and instead chase this ghost world where no one had ever dared to venture before. He wasn't alone, of course. There were others on his team: engineers, geologists, biologists, all here to assist in cataloging whatever they could find. But Nathaniel was different. His focus was solely on the ruins, ancient ruins, hidden beneath layers of stone and dust, untouched by time, yet humming with the subtle signs of a forgotten history. As his boots crunched across the uneven terrain, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something far older and more aware than he was ready to admit. Days passed as they excavated, slowly but surely uncovering parts of a colossal structure that seemed to stretch down into the very core of the planet. The architecture was unlike anything Nathaniel had ever seen. Its sleek curves and angular designs didn't match any known alien species. There was a strange elegance to the structure, but also a kind of malevolent energy emanating from it. He dismissed it at first as mere speculation, but the deeper they dug, the stronger the feeling became. Then came the chamber, the discovery that would change everything for Nathaniel and for the galaxy. The walls of the chamber were covered in deep carvings, intricate patterns woven together to form what could only be described as a celestial map. The stars and constellations lined up perfectly, but with one glaring exception. There was one symbol that didn't belong, a symbol that had been repeated across the walls, a symbol that seemed to pulse faintly under Nathaniel's touch. It was unlike any known script, and as he traced the lines with his fingers, the air around him seemed to hum. The chamber was sealed almost perfectly, as if it had been locked away on purpose. Something about it felt wrong, but Nathaniel couldn't resist the pull. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew he had to see what lay inside. No one had entered this tomb for thousands of years, and no one else was crazy enough to try, but he was here. And this was his moment. With a final push, he activated the ancient mechanism, unlocking the chamber with a shudder that rattled the walls. He hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity was too strong, and so he stepped inside, into a room that defied all logic. The air was thick with dust and time, but the object at the center of the chamber was anything but ordinary. It was a sarcophagus, an immense stone coffin, sealed with strange markings that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light around him. Nathaniel could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, the hairs on his arms prickle, and as he reached out his hand to touch the stone, the ground trembled ever so slightly. The sarcophagus opened with a low groan, and a rush of cold air spilled out into the room. Nathaniel's heart pounded as the darkness parted like a veil, and what he saw inside was not what he had expected. He was not alone. As the sarcophagus opened, a wave of cold air rushed toward Nathaniel, and he froze in place, his breath catching in his throat. The darkness inside the tomb seemed to shift and writhe, as if something alive was waiting within. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw her, a figure cloaked in shadow, reclining on a bed of strange alien materials, her long limbs curled in unnatural positions, her face hidden from view. But Nathaniel could sense something ancient, something powerful emanating from her, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The hairs on his neck stood up, and instinctively he stepped back, the chill in the air now mixed with an electric tension that crawled up his spine. He reached for his comm device to call for backup, but his hand shook too much to hold it steady. His mind raced with the implications of what he was seeing. What kind of being could survive in this place for so long? He turned his gaze back to the sarcophagus as a strange noise filled the room, like a low rumble growing louder and louder until it was almost deafening. And then in a single motion, the figure in the sarcophagus stirred. A gasp escaped Nathaniel's lips as the figure moved, her eyes flashing open, the color of molten gold. and as she rose up from the stone bed, the chamber seemed to grow darker, the temperature dropping even further, the air thick with an unspoken power that seemed to choke him as she stood before him. Her form was graceful yet terrifying, towering over him, her body adorned in what looked like battle-worn armor, covered in strange runes and symbols of an alien civilization far older than anything he had ever encountered. Her presence was suffocating, like a weight pressing down on his chest, and she did not speak for a long moment, as if studying him through eyes that seemed to see into his very soul. Nathaniel tried to move, but his legs felt like lead. He wanted to scream, but the words caught in his throat. He knew this was a mistake. He knew he shouldn't have opened the sarcophagus, but it was too late now. Her gaze flickered down to him, and her lips parted, revealing sharp fangs glistening in the faint light. Her voice was low and commanding when it finally came, a sound like metal scraping against stone. "Who are you, human?" she said, the words coming with such force they almost seemed to vibrate through his bones. Nathaniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. He managed to say, "I'm Dar Nathaniel Kowai. I didn't mean to disturb you. I was just exploring the ruins. I thought this was a tomb." His words came out rushed as his heart pounded in his chest. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and then she laughed, a deep, resonant sound that sent chills down Nathaniel's spine. It was a laugh that carried centuries of pain and power within it. "Tomb," she echoed, as if the word itself amused her. "This is no mere tomb, human. This is my prison." Her words cut through the air like a blade, and Nathaniel felt a cold sweat form on his brow. He took a hesitant step back, but she was too quick. With a single movement, she crossed the distance between them, her hand like a vice around his throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "You have awakened me," she hissed, her golden eyes narrowing as she held him suspended in the air. "And now you will answer for it." The sheer strength in her grip made it impossible to breathe. Nathaniel gasped and struggled, his mind racing, trying to find a way out as the world began to fade around him, darkness creeping into his vision. But before he could lose consciousness, she suddenly released him, letting him crumple to the floor in a heap. "You will live for now," she said, her voice softer but no less dangerous. "But you have made a mistake, human." He coughed desperately, pulling air into his lungs as he stared up at her, the reality of the situation sinking in. She wasn't just some alien, she was something far older and more dangerous, something he wasn't prepared for. And yet, as he lay there gasping for breath, a part of him couldn't help but wonder who or what she really was, and what would happen if he couldn't control the consequences of his actions. Nathaniel struggled to his knees, his breath ragged, his heart pounding in his chest, as he looked up at the towering figure standing before him. She was a goddess in her presence, regal and terrifying, with eyes that burned with an ancient fire. He tried to speak, but his throat felt tight. The words stuck somewhere deep within him as the weight of her gaze pressed down on him harder than before. "Who are you?" Her voice was like a whisper of thunder, the words wrapping around him, tightening with each passing second. The raw power in her tone made him feel smaller than he had ever felt in his life, smaller than a speck of dust caught in a storm. "I am just an archaeologist," Nathaniel managed to croak, his voice cracking under the pressure. "I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know you were in there. I just wanted to find the ruins." She tilted her head slowly, as if contemplating his words, her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak for a long moment, and during that silence, Nathaniel felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle into his bones. He couldn't escape her gaze, he couldn't run. She had him trapped in a way that was beyond physical restraint. She was power incarnate, and he was nothing. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer, but carrying the same crushing weight. "You didn't know," she said slowly. "You didn't know what you released from that tomb." She paused for a moment, as if weighing her next words. "But now you will." The air around them seemed to grow colder still, and Nathaniel's fingers twitched as he reached out for something, anything to steady himself. But there was nothing but the oppressive silence that filled the chamber. He wanted to say something more, but what could he say to someone like her, someone who had been sealed away for so long, someone who had been trapped for centuries by her own people? "You don't know who I am," she continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You think I am just a relic of the past, but I am more than that. I was the ruler of an empire, a queen who commanded legions of warriors, who bent the very stars to my will. The words hit Nathaniel like a slap. He tried to stand, but his legs felt weak beneath him. The shock of her confession left him reeling. Who was this being who had been locked away for so long? And why had she been sealed? Was she truly a queen? Or was she something more monstrous than even the stars could bear? "My name is Nyrith," she said finally, her voice carrying a quiet, almost lethal authority, "and I was imprisoned by my own kind for a reason." She stepped closer, and Nathaniel involuntarily flinched, her presence overwhelming his senses. "I was betrayed by those who feared me, feared the power I commanded, but they could not destroy me. They could only imprison me in this place to keep me from reclaiming what was mine." There was a strange edge to her words, something that made Nathaniel's skin crawl, a twisted mixture of pride and bitterness, as if her entire existence was one long tale of betrayal and vengeance. Yet there was something else too, a loneliness, buried beneath the fury, something he could barely comprehend, but it made his heart ache in a way he wasn't sure was wise. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked the question, barely a whisper escaping his cracked lips. "Because you have awakened me human," she replied with a sudden fierceness that made him flinch again. "You have set me free, and now you must understand the consequences of your actions. You cannot undo what you've done, but you can help me. And if you do not, I will let you die here with the knowledge that you were the one who opened the door to my return." Her gaze pierced him as if it were an unspoken promise. "And I do not need to tell you what that would mean for you or your kind." He swallowed hard, trying to process the weight of her words, trying to keep his mind focused on the moment, instead of the overwhelming sense of danger hanging in the air, like a guillotine ready to fall. And yet, despite the terror rising in his chest, despite everything, he wanted to know more. He needed to understand more about her, and what this truly meant for him and the galaxy itself. "So what now?" he asked, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "What do you want from me?" Nyrith paused for a long moment, her golden eyes searching his face as if she could see the very thoughts racing through his mind. Then her lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You will help me understand what has become of my empire." And then she said with a dark promise, "Then you will help me reclaim what was taken from me." The words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. Nathaniel could feel his pulse hammering in his temples as he tried to process what Nyrith was asking of him. Help her reclaim an empire she had lost centuries ago. The idea seemed insane. It was too much for one human to handle. He opened his mouth to protest, but found no words coming out. The sheer weight of her demand left him stunned, paralyzed by the enormity of what he had just become a part of. Nyrith watched him carefully, her golden eyes never leaving his face, as if she was waiting for him to say something, anything that could prove his worth or his fear. He could feel the air growing heavier with each passing second, like a storm was approaching. Her silent scrutiny was suffocating, but he couldn't break away from it. He had made a choice when he opened that sarcophagus, and now there was no going back. He swallowed hard and forced himself to speak, his voice hoarse from the pressure of her gaze. "I don't know how to help you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm an archaeologist, not a warrior. I don't even understand what kind of empire you had or what happened to it. Why was it destroyed? Why were you sealed away?" Her lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it, only cold calculation. "You are correct, human. You are not a warrior, and you could never understand the vastness of what we were capable of, but you will learn," she said, her voice steady and unyielding. "I will teach you what you need to know, but first you must understand that this galaxy is not the same as it once was. It has changed, and in some ways it has forgotten the power that once ruled it." She stepped back slightly, and for the first time Nathaniel noticed the faintest shimmer in the air around her. It was as if the very space around her bent and rippled with her presence, a palpable energy that made him feel like he was standing at the edge of something ancient and dangerous, something that could consume him if he was not careful. "My people," Nyrith continued, her voice taking on a darker tone, "were masters of the stars. We spanned entire systems with our might, and our reach, our armies were unmatched, and our technology was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. But we were not invincible. Our enemies were many, and our hubris led to our downfall. We sought to conquer too much, and in the end we were betrayed by those who once served us." Her gaze hardened, and Nathaniel felt the air grow colder still. "They feared me, they feared my power, and so they locked me away in this tomb, hoping that I would never rise again." He stood there in stunned silence, as her words sank in. Her empire had been one of domination, one of power and conquest, but it had been destroyed by betrayal and fear. That realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and for a brief moment he felt a twinge of sympathy for her. But that was quickly swallowed up by the overwhelming fear that lingered in his chest. This was no mere prisoner he was dealing with. This was a queen of war, a ruler of an empire whose ambitions had shattered entire civilizations. "But now I am free," she said, her voice low and powerful, "and I will reclaim what was lost no matter the cost." She paused and looked at him with a gaze that sent a shiver down his spine. "You will help me do this, human, because if you do not, you will find out just how unforgiving I can be." He didn't know what to say. He had opened the tomb and awakened something far beyond his comprehension. Now he was caught in the middle of a galaxy-shattering conflict with an alien queen whose thirst for vengeance seemed boundless. The weight of his situation pressed down on him like a collapsing star, and he knew that the choices he made from this moment forward would change everything. "So," Nyreth said with a hint of amusement in her voice, "do you still wish to be my guide, or will you become a forgotten footnote in history?" He looked at her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resolve. He had no choice now, no way to turn back. He was in this to the end, whether he liked it or not. "I'll help you," he said, the words coming out slowly but firmly, "but I need to understand everything about your empire, your people, everything." Nyreth's smile widened, and this time there was something almost predatory in her expression. "Good," she said with a soft chuckle. "Then you will learn much more than you ever thought possible, human." The tension in the air seemed to crackle with electricity as Nyreth's words settled over Nathaniel like a heavy cloak. He felt as if he had stepped into a storm whose fury he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He had no choice now. He had bound himself to her. In some strange way, a part of him was terrified by the enormity of what he had just agreed to, but another part of him was fascinated by the sheer power. She commanded. She was a being out of legend, a queen of war, returned from the past to reclaim her throne, and he was now tied to her fate. The days that followed were a blur of constant movement as Nyreth began to shape their next steps. She had no patience for delay, no tolerance for hesitation. Every moment was precious in her eyes. Every minute wasted was one more minute her enemies could use to prepare against her. The alien mercenaries who had once sought her capture were not the only threat lurking in the shadows. There were factions throughout the galaxy who had a vested interest in keeping her imprisoned, and they would not simply let her rise again without a fight. As they made their way deeper into the ruins, Nathaniel saw more of the strange alien technology that once powered Nyreth's empire. There were walls that pulsed with faint light, hidden chambers filled with strange weapons and devices that hummed with latent energy he couldn't even begin to understand. Most of it felt like a dream, too far removed from the reality he knew. But there was something intoxicating about it all, the raw power of these ancient creations, the terrifying beauty of a long-lost civilization that had been erased from history by its own ambition. In one of the chambers they discovered a ship unlike anything Nathaniel had ever seen. It was sleek and silent, its hull glimmering with a strange energy that seemed to warp the very air around it. It was clear this was no ordinary vessel. It was a warship designed for power and speed. And it was obvious from the way Nyreth's eyes lit up as she stepped toward it that this was her key to regaining her strength. She spoke little, but her movements were sharp and purposeful as she inspected the ship's systems, almost as if she were reacquainting herself with an old friend. "This will be our base of operations," she said, finally breaking the silence, her voice carrying the weight of finality. "Once I have control of this ship, no one will be able to stand against me." Nathaniel watched her closely as she worked her way through the ship's control panels, her fingers dancing over the alien interfaces with ease. It was clear that she was no stranger to this kind of technology, but there was something unsettling in the way she moved with such confidence, her command of it so absolute. It was as if she had been born to wield this power, and it was a power that could easily be turned against anyone who stood in her way. He stood off to the side, unsure of how to contribute to her efforts. He had no knowledge of this technology, no expertise in the kinds of systems Nereth was interacting with. He felt small in comparison to her vast knowledge and experience, yet he knew that his role wasn't entirely passive. He was the one who had awoken her, and now he had to help her find her place in this new galaxy. As she continued her work, Nereth turned to him, her golden eyes locking onto his with a predatory gleam. "You still have doubts," she said, her voice cold and direct. "You wonder if you've made the right choice to align yourself with me. You think you can change the course of what's coming. You believe your actions will make a difference." He didn't respond at first, but his mind was racing. He had made a pact with a being who had the power to reshape the galaxy itself, and as much as he feared her, he couldn't deny the pull of that power, the strange sense of awe and terror that seemed to tug at the edges of his thoughts every time she spoke. "You're wrong, human," she continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You will never change what's coming. The galaxy is already on the brink of war, and you will not stop it no matter how hard you try. But you will help me succeed in my mission, and in doing so you will find your place in this new order." Her words hung in the air, and Nathaniel realized that he had crossed a line from which there would be no return. He was now part of something far bigger than himself, and whatever lay ahead would be shaped by his decisions, his willingness to follow her lead, and whether or not he could survive the storm that was about to engulf the galaxy. The days blurred together as Nathaniel found himself becoming more deeply entangled in Nereth's plans. Every waking moment was spent preparing for what was to come. The weight of her expectations never left him. It was in the way she moved, in the way she spoke. Everything about her was designed to dominate, and he couldn't help but feel like a small cog in a machine far too powerful to control. The ship was a marvel in itself, an artifact of an empire long gone, but still brimming with an intelligence beyond human comprehension. Nereth seemed to understand it effortlessly, and each time she unlocked a new feature of the ship, it was like she was awakening something within herself. Too, the ship's systems responded to her like a living being, and Nathaniel found himself watching her with a mixture of awe and terror. She was already shaping the galaxy in ways he couldn't begin to understand, and it was clear she had no intention of stopping. One evening, as they were moving through the ship's vast hallways, Nereth stopped suddenly and turned to face him, her golden eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a chill through his body. "Do you understand yet, human?" she asked, her voice soft but deadly. "Do you understand the weight of the choice you've made?" Nathaniel hesitated, but he couldn't lie to her. "I'm beginning to," he said, his voice thick with the weight of everything that had happened so far. "But I don't fully understand what this will mean for the galaxy, for the people out there." "The galaxy," she said with a laugh that was cold and sharp, "the galaxy will bend to my will, or it will burn. It is already too late for it to remain the same. I have been locked away for too long. And now my enemies are scattered across the stars. They will not sit idly by as I reclaim what is mine. And you will see that firsthand." She paused, her expression darkening. "But you will help me. You have no choice." Nathaniel swallowed hard as her words settled in his chest like a heavy stone. He had never imagined himself caught up in something like this, never imagined he would be a part of the return of an ancient queen who had once ruled with absolute power, yet here he was bound to her fate, and the fate of the galaxy itself. The realization hit him like a thunderclap, and for the first time since he had met her, he truly felt the weight of his situation. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You will help me rebuild my forces," she said with a deadly calm. "There are still those loyal to me scattered across the galaxy, remnants of my empire, who will answer my call. Once they know I have returned, you will seek them out and bring them to me." "And if they don't want to join you?" Nathaniel asked carefully. "Then they will be swept aside," she said, her voice hard as stone. "No one will stand in my way." The finality in her tone left no room for debate. She was determined to have what she wanted, no matter the cost, and Nathaniel knew there was no turning back from this point forward. He was as much a part of her rise as the ship itself. His every decision would shape the coming storm, and as terrifying as that thought was, he couldn't deny the pull of it. "You will learn more than you ever thought possible," Nereth continued, as if reading his thoughts. "You will learn what it means to stand beside me or against me, and you'll understand the true power of the stars." She turned away then without another word and continued her path down the corridor, leaving Nathaniel standing there with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. His life had already changed beyond recognition, and he wondered if he would ever be able to return to the world he once knew, or if that world was now lost to him forever. Days turned into weeks, and Nathaniel found himself sinking deeper into the strange world Nereth had created around him. Her presence was always there like a shadow following him everywhere. She was a queen of unrelenting power, and he was nothing more than an instrument to her. She pushed him at every turn, demanding more and more of his time and attention. Every moment was spent planning, strategizing, and hunting for the lost remnants of her empire. They traveled from system to system, seeking out the hidden corners of the galaxy where her loyalists might still remain, and each time they found one, each time they made contact with a former member of her empire, the tension was palpable. Would they join her again, or would they try to resist? Some were eager to bend the knee, others were more hesitant, reluctant to embrace the return of a ruler they had long since written off as a legend or a nightmare. But regardless of their initial reactions, they always fell into line in the end. Nereth's power was undeniable, and Nathaniel could see the way her influence spread. With each success, she gained more followers, more resources, and with every new ally she gathered, her presence in the galaxy grew even more formidable. It was during one of these missions that Nathaniel saw something that shook him to his core. They had tracked a group of former generals to an old military outpost hidden deep within a gas giant's rings. The place was a ruin now abandoned for centuries, but the moment they stepped inside, the air was thick with the echoes of war. The walls were lined with old battle plans and strategies, maps of star systems and fleets that once belonged to Nereth's empire. And as they made their way deeper into the base, Nathaniel caught sight of something strange, an artifact sitting alone on a pedestal at the center of the room. It was a helmet decorated with alien runes, intricate and delicate in design, but it was the energy it radiated that caught his attention. It hummed with an unmistakable power, something ancient and untamed. Without thinking, he reached out to touch it, his fingers brushing against the cool surface, and in that instant the entire room seemed to shift around him. A wave of visions and memories flooded his mind, images of vast armies marching across star systems, of worlds falling before Nereth's forces, of the queen herself standing tall and proud over the ashes of her enemies. The memories felt like they weren't his, they were someone else's, and yet they were so vivid, so real that they left him breathless. He could feel the weight of them pressing down on him, crushing him under the burden of all that had come before. When the vision faded, he was back in the room, staring at the helmet, his hand still resting on its surface. But the feeling of being connected to something far larger than himself remained. The echoes of Nereth's empire were alive in him now, and he realized just how deep his entanglement with her really went. He wasn't just helping her reclaim her empire, he was becoming part of it. He was feeling the very pulse of it in his bones, and it terrified him. "You've touched it." Nereth's voice cut through his thoughts, and he turned to see her standing in the doorway, her eyes gleaming with a knowing look. "You felt it, the power of my empire coursing through you." She stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "It's in you now, human, you can't escape it." Nathaniel opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. The truth of what she said was undeniable. He had touched something ancient, something that had connected him to the past, and now he was a part of her legacy, whether he wanted to be or not. And as she stood before him, he knew there was no turning back from this, no returning to the life he had once known. The weight of what had just happened hung heavy in the air like a suffocating cloud. Nathaniel stood frozen as Nereth's gaze bore into him with a mixture of expectation and something else, something darker, as if she were waiting for him to break. But Nathaniel didn't break. He couldn't break, not now. Not after everything he had already witnessed, not after feeling the pull of the ancient power that had been awakened within him. "You're different now," Nereth said, her voice low and dangerous as she stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You've touched the heart of my empire, and it has left its mark on you." Nathaniel didn't speak at first. The words wouldn't come. The power he had just felt still surged through his veins like fire, and he couldn't deny it. There was something in him now, something that tied him to Nereth in a way he hadn't anticipated, something that made him feel as though he were part of something far larger than himself. I didn't ask for this, he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse from the weight of his thoughts. No one asks for power, she replied with a smile that was both cruel and knowing. It is given or taken, and once it's in you, there is no escaping it. He clenched his fists as the truth of her words settled deep within him. She was right in ways he couldn't deny. This wasn't just about helping her anymore. This wasn't just about following her orders. He was becoming part of her vision, part of the empire she was rebuilding. And the more he understood, the more he realized he couldn't escape it. He couldn't outrun the shadow of what he had awakened. Do you feel it? Nyreth continued, her voice like a whisper in the silence. The power that courses through your veins, the same power that once built worlds and crushed civilizations beneath its heel. You are a part of it now, Nathaniel, you are a part of me. He shook his head, trying to rid himself of the overwhelming sensation of her presence inside him. But the more he tried to push it away, the stronger it became. It was in his thoughts, it was in his blood, it was in everything, and it terrified him in ways he couldn't put into words. Why did you choose me? He finally asked the question that had been gnawing at the edges of his mind ever since he first encountered her. Why me of all people? Why not someone who could actually help you fight, who could lead your armies or command your ships? She laughed softly, and for the first time in a long while there was something almost tender in her gaze. Because you are human, Nathaniel, because you are something that no one else can be. She paused, as if carefully considering her next words. You have a unique perspective on this galaxy. You are not bound by the same loyalties, the same fears as those who once served me. You are free in ways they were not, and that is why you are the perfect choice. He stared at her, struggling to understand how she could see him as anything more than a tool, a pawn in her larger game. But something in her words resonated with him. He had always been an outsider, an explorer, a seeker of truths buried in the ruins of forgotten civilizations. And now it seemed that he was on the brink of uncovering the greatest truth of all. What do you want from me now? He asked, his voice steady, but filled with a new resolve. You will help me conquer what is mine, she said, her voice full of certainty and promise. You will help me rebuild the empire that was lost, and you will help me destroy those who stand in my way. The room seemed to grow colder with her words, as if the very air around them was charged with the coming storm, and Nathaniel knew that this was it. This was the point of no return. He was no longer an observer, no longer a passive participant. He was a part of this war, now a part of Nyreth's return, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The finality in Nyreth's words hung in the air like a suffocating weight, and Nathaniel could feel the very core of the galaxy shifting beneath his feet. This was the moment where everything changed. No longer a mere observer, he had been drawn into a war that spanned the stars, a war that was as ancient as the empires that had once ruled them. And now he was bound to the queen who would reshape it all. The ship hummed with power as they made their way toward their next destination, an uncharted system where the last remnants of Nyreth's allies were rumored to be hiding. Nathaniel could feel the pulse of the ship's engines as they soared through the void, and with every passing second, he felt himself becoming more entwined with the mission. He was no longer just helping her, he was becoming part of it. He had taken his place at her side, and now there was no escape. He stood at the observation deck, watching the stars streak past them as they traveled in the vastness of space, his mind racing with questions he still didn't have answers to. What had he gotten himself into? What had Nyreth's empire truly been? What did it mean to be a part of her rise again? And yet, no matter how many questions he asked, there were no easy answers, none that would set his mind at ease. A sudden movement beside him broke his reverie, and he turned to see Nyreth standing there, her eyes filled with the same cold determination they always held. She was different now, sharper, more focused, as if the very weight of her ambitions were making her burn brighter. And it was impossible not to feel it, that raw energy that seemed to radiate off of her like a force of nature. You've been quiet, she said, her voice low and knowing, thinking about your place in all of this. Nathaniel nodded, though he didn't trust himself to speak. The truth was too complicated, too tangled up in the fear and fascination he felt toward her. The galaxy was changing before his eyes, and he was a part of that change, now a participant in a war he had never asked for. You will understand soon enough, she continued, her voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. Once we are in the heart of the galaxy, you will see what my empire truly was, what it can be again. And then you will understand why this war must be fought, why it must be won." She stepped closer, and for a moment he could see the depth of the conviction in her eyes, the power that burned there. And it wasn't just power that she sought, it was something more. It was a legacy, a kingdom, a throne that had once been hers, and that she would stop at nothing to reclaim. "You have seen the signs," she said softly, "the remnants of my empire scattered like dust across the stars, but they are not forgotten. They are waiting for me to return, waiting for the moment when they will rise again, and when they do, the galaxy will kneel before us." The cold determination in her voice sent a shiver through Nathaniel, and for the first time he understood the true weight of what he had agreed to. This wasn't just about helping her reclaim power, it was about a complete transformation of the galaxy itself, a reshaping of everything the galaxy had become since her fall, and he was standing at the center of it all. "You will help me rebuild this empire," she said, her voice hardening with finality, "and together we will bring an end to the old order. We will forge a new empire, a new future, one that will be built on the ashes of those who tried to keep me locked away." He nodded slowly, the realization settling in like a storm cloud overhead. He had no choice now. There was no going back. He had already made his decision, and now it was time to see it through, whatever that might mean for him and for the galaxy. As the ship sped toward their destination, Nathaniel couldn't help but feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. He was no longer a mere archaeologist. He was part of something far larger, a force that would shape the stars and the future. And as terrifying as it was, he couldn't help but wonder if he had become more than just an instrument in Neres's hands, if he had become a player in the game. She was playing a game where no one was safe, and everything was at stake.